Hello world, and we are back. My name's Kyle Fischl, and this is going to be episode 91 of my poker vlog. And for this episode, I cover two sessions, the first of which occurred at the Tampa Hard Rock. Played a 4-hour 2-5 session there. In the same weekend, I travel all the way across the state of Florida to the Hollywood Hard Rock Hotel and Casino and play another 4-hour session there. Additionally, I have some footage from the Tampa Bay Comic-Con, which was a pretty fun experience. And since I have a bunch of hands to go over, we are going to roll the tape. Alright, first interesting hand. In the Hard Rock of Tampa Bay, you can straddle from literally any position at the table besides the blinds. So in this particular hand, my opponent's actually has a $10 straddle from under the gun +1. I'm in +2 with pocket 10s, definitely going to raise this one. I raised to $30. It folds all the way to the straddler, who min 3 bets it to $60. Kind of an odd move. I'm not sure exactly what he's saying he has, but I'm not going to fold for only $30, so I make the call. We are heads up to a flop of 9-6-4 rainbow, and this board does not seem to scare my opponent as he bets $100. It's kind of odd. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I suppose my opponent does have all the overpairs higher than 10s, as well as pocket 9s at some frequency, but I don't think you would bet that high if you had those types of holdings. I think this bet size is more weighted towards bluffs with like ace king, ace queen, ace jack type hands, where you think you just put a lot of pressure on your opponent who missed this board a high percentage of the time. So with that as my thought process, I'm pretty happy to make this call, thinking I have the best hand almost always. Well, when the turn is the ace of clubs, that's kind of a card I really didn't want to see. Even worse, my opponent just open ships it all in for about $500. As I said in the previous street, as I put him on ace X, I think this is a pretty easy fold. However, I think if I would have thought about it a little more, I would realize that the 2x pot turn shove is kind of odd and there's really no reason to do it with an ace X. I suppose that's both hindsight and the fact that I pretty quickly just fold pocket 10s face up, and my opponent's pretty happy to show me king queen offsuit. So pure air and pure aggression is good enough for the win. So nice hand to that guy.
You got knocked the out.
Next interesting hand. It folds all the way to the opponent from the last hand. He raises to $20. I'm on the cutoff with 10-9 of clubs. Definitely going to play in position with a suited connector against a player who's happy to throw the money around. So I call. One of the blinds calls as well. So we're going 3 ways to a flop of jack 9-7, 2 clubs. So straight draw, flush draw, straight flush draw, and a pair. I have absolutely smashed this board. When the preflop aggressor bets $35, I'm going to just raise very small. I'm trying to build the pot here as I'm highly likely to have the best hand by the river, but I don't need to raise too big just yet because I currently just have a pair of 9s. So I raised to $75. The blind folds and then my opponent decides to make the call. So I'm just praying for a straight card or a flush card, something to help me out here. Definitely would really like to make a hand. The turn is the 9 of diamonds. So I do make a hand, but kind of a really odd way. When my opponent checks to me, I'm kind of unclear on what would be the best option here. I double block club draws now. I block one of the straights. I have 3 9s. Because I block so many hands that I hope my opponent could have that could pay me off, I don't really think I can go too big with this turn bet. So I continue for the same sizing I did on the flop. I bet $75. My opponent makes the call again. Still not very sure what rivers I want to see. The 10 of hearts is one that I'm quite happy about. What makes this hand even weirder is my opponent leads out for $100. Not certain if it's a blocker bet or he has so much value that he just won't let this check through. Either way, the only hands that I'm really worried about are pocket jacks and maybe exactly jack 9 of hearts. So hoping my opponent could have just a regular 8, maybe a 9-8, 10-8, something like that. I'm not going to raise to a 3x, 4x standard amount. I'm just going to go for an all-in sizing. Additionally, because I will do this sometimes if I had ace x of clubs. So the fact that there's actually plenty of bluffs I could have on this board as well as my exact full house, I think it's a pretty good spot to just go for it all. Well, my opponent needs an exact count and he takes well over a minute with his decision before eventually deciding to call. And as we have him slightly covered, we stack that opponent and get to profit in this session. In for 1100, have a smidge of profit now. However, the next interesting hand, my opponent once again is straddling, this time from the hijack, which means I'm first to act in the cutoff with pocket jacks. Definitely creates a odd dynamic, but if an opponent's going to straddle every single hand, I have no problem with it. So looking down at pocket jacks, I raise to 30, pretty much a standard raise with a relative premium. Only the straddler calls, so we're heads up to a flop of queen 8 deuce rainbow. When it checks to me, I think I'm clearly either very far ahead or very far behind on this board. Boards this dry, I will check back sometimes with ace queen, king queen sometimes. So I think I can also check back jacks at some frequency and still have the best hand and allow my opponent to catch up a little bit and get some value on later streets. So I check this one back. When the turn is the 6 of diamonds, my opponent bets $50. Makes me believe he has either a middling pair or a diamond draw. I don't really think a queen would have to bet this big. So thinking my opponent's both weak and capped at one pair at best, I think I could turn my exact hand into a bluff pretty happily. I raised to $135. If a weak queen folds to this raise, I'd say it's a great result. I could still get called by diamonds and 8-9, 8-10, things like that. So I'm pretty happy with this raise. Additionally, I gained the betting lead, so it'd be tough for my opponent to lead out river against me, and I could choose if I want to value bet jacks or just check it back based on dicey river cards. After a bit of thinking, my opponent eventually makes the call. When the river is a 3 of diamonds, not a very good card, not one I'm really looking for. When my opponent checks to me, I suppose I could turn my jack of diamonds blocker into a bluff, but I have plenty of showdown value against single middling pairs. Diamonds are almost never going to fold, and there are some 2 pairs that my opponent could also have based on the run out. So I'm happy to just check this one back, and my opponent has queen 7 offsuit. Kind of a disappointing result. Definitely a less than standard line I chose. Leave me a comment below on what you think the most optimal line is when you play jacks and there's one overcard. I'd be interested to see what the world thinks of this one. So a final hand of note from this Tampa session.
Hang on to your seat, baby, cause this one's a screamer.
A new player has just sat down. He has announced that he's in for $500. He's still pulling his chips out very slowly. And this particular opponent bets $15 with only like 110 in front of him at the time, but he's in for 500. I make the call on the button with ace 8 of spades, and one of the blinds calls as well, so we're going 3 ways to a flop of jack 4 deuce 2 spades. Very, very good board for me. Happy with the ace high flush draw. It checks the preflop aggressor. He checks to me. Now he's got about 220 in front of him, still reaching that 500 mark. I'm never gonna just check the ace high flush draw here. If my opponent's completely whiffed, they'll just fold and I win. I won't have to make a hand, and I can even get called by worse flush draws and like 5-3, ace 3, things like that. So happy to put out a bet of $30. Well, my opponent's finally gotten his $500 worth of chips in front of him, and after he counts it out kind of slowly, weirdly, he eventually just tosses in 80. Kind of odd. He is the preflop aggressor and he check raised on this board. I suppose he could have pocket jacks in his range, but I think jacks just have to standardly bet here and protect against flush draws. So either way, I think he's capped at 1 pair at best. Hoping I can bink an ace on this turn to make the best hand. Well, a king of spades will do just as good. And this time my opponent checks to me. His check raise on the flop definitely indicates he has some level of hand value. I really don't want to bet too big and give whatever holding he has the ability to fold. I want to go really small with it, but still a sizing that I think will give me a good ratio for a river jam. So I bet $60, thinking I'll have about a $300 river bet if he calls. Well, my opponent check raises me again, this time to 175, leaving himself about 175 behind. So we'll just happily get it all in right now. If he somehow has a set or two pair, good luck us, I guess. All in. So I put him all in. He snap calls. He says that he has one out. I feel relatively confident that I could fade a single out. The 7 of clubs does not change my hand. It is still the nuts, and he had 10-9 of spades. We are the benefactor of a medium-sized cooler here, flush over flush. Happy to take this one down. So after 4 hours of playing in Tampa, we are plus $725, which equates to $181 per hour, or 36 big blinds an hour. Please take a moment and subscribe. Thank you.
But wait, there's more.
But we're not done on this trip yet. Oh no, we travel from the Tampa Hard Rock all the way to the Hollywood Hard Rock and get a session there as well in the same weekend. So the first hand of note from Hollywood 2-5. With a $10 straddle, I am in middle position with 10-9 of hearts. I raised to $30. Well, a late position short stack is all in for about $100, and it folds back to me. Only 70 to win 130. I think it's pretty close, calling it what's most likely a 50-50 or 60-40 type scenario. So, but thinking this is a plus EV call in the long run, I decide to make the call and gamble with some suited hearts. Well, the flop actually gives me a gut shot and a heart draw, even though it's 2 overs, and I think my opponent has some pair at least. All in all, not the worst flop for me. The run out ends me with third pair, not really thinking I have the best hand. My opponent shows ace jack, so 2 pairs are better than 1 very small pair, and I double player up in the first orbit of my first session at Hollywood. After that, a lot of hands that were not very noteworthy, where I win a lot of small or medium-sized pots pretty consistently. Before I button straddle, there are 3 limps to me. I have 6-7 of spades. Definitely going to raise this one up. I make it $35. Not really trying to raise to a sizing where I get folds. I really want to take this massively multi-way in position, so that's why I choose the sizing that I did. All 3 opponents call, so we are 4 ways to a flop of 7-6 deuce, 2 hearts. The good thing about these suited connectors is they're often very easy to play. You know exactly where you are. You either bury the board and you continue, or you whiff and can likely fold for risking very little. On this one, it checks all the way to the cutoff, who leads into me for $30. Having a lot of the board locked up of actual made hands, I think my opponent's likely drawing to hearts and trying to name his own price for cheaply. So I am not going to let that happen with top 2 pair. I raise to $90. It folds back to my opponent, who now flop 3 bets me to $235. At this point in the hand, I feel like our exact hand ranges are reversed from what I just said. I don't think a flush draw would ever 3-bet on the flop. However, I do think a flush draw could raise and then call a 3-bet on the flop. However, my opponent's 3-bet is pretty much saying that he's pretty nutted. He's basically saying that he flopped a straight or flopped a set, and the only set that's unblocked is 4s. I don't really know how often my opponent's ever is actually limp calling 5-3 or 8-5s. But with all this being said, I think that top 2 pair is just too strong to fold. I think at some frequency my opponent could even have 6-4 or 7-4. And I believe any hearts, 8-5 or 3, will slow the action down on this hand dramatically. So I decided to peel one and play this one in position. When the turn is the king of hearts, it is definitely an interesting card. If my opponent was to bet, I don't see him betting more than $150 with his entire range. If he was bluffing with a flush draw, I don't expect him to bet big and give me the chance to fold when he makes a hand. And I could easily have a flush. I could easily play ace 5 of hearts, ace x of hearts, 8 9 of hearts, all the exact same way, which would have a straight drawing dead, have some 2 pairs and set combinations in pretty bad shape. After a decent amount of time, my opponent checks to me. I believe if I have medium-sized flush, I would check back for pot control. I believe if I had a nut flush, I would check back for deception and go for a massive bet on the river. My exact hand of having a decent amount of showdown value, I think adds to my check. The hands that I would continue here with, if I had like ace 5, just ace of hearts, then I would definitely fire here relatively big. But as played, I checked this one back. The river is a miracle 7 of diamonds. So I river the effective nuts, as my opponent should never have pocket kings really, or king 7. My opponent checks. I no longer believe my opponent could have a flopped set. If he had pocket 4s, there's no way he would check back a full house on this particular board. If my opponent did for some reason flop 3-bet with heart, it might be tough to get too much out of him for this board pair. And if my opponent had a straight, there's just a lot of stuff working out there, but how many 2-5 players are good enough to fold strong hands when facing large river bets? Well, all in all, I have a full house. I announced 375, thinking that all my opponent's holdings will be put in a tough spot. I shouldn't have a full house here all too often, and I think my opponent could level themselves into a call, as I probably shouldn't be betting a flush this big on this particular river card. Level himself into a call, not discounting flushes and full houses. Call with whatever holding he was willing to 3-bet the flop with. So either way, that is my thought process. I bet 375. After a decently long tank, my opponent folds 5-8 of diamonds face up. So I got a very fortunate run out, both on the turn and on the river. Let me know how you would have played this one in the comments.
I have come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass, and I'm all out of bubblegum.
In for 1100 again, but have some profit. Alright, next interesting hand. With 1 limp to me, I'm on the cutoff of pocket 5s. I raise to $20. It folds all the way to the limper, who limp 3-bets to $60. Kind of odd. I'm really not a fan of limp 3-betters, but this specific player is on about his 3rd buy-in in 3 hours, so I believe a bit of tilting and a bit of loosening up may be involved in this particular hand. So I make the call. When the flop is ace, jack, deuce, rainbow, my opponent's the first to act and he checks to me. Thinking there's a chance he could have like pocket kings, pocket queens, and just fold to the ace high board, I bet $55. The only real value hand my opponent could have here is pocket aces and pocket jacks, which I guess would check this board as they have so much of it locked up. But thinking it's more likely my opponent just missed and will fold, I make this bet. My opponent decides to make the call. When the turn's the 5 of diamonds, and I turn a set, my opponent checks to me a second time. I'm not sure he's strong enough to get 3 streets out of, so I'm hoping he can catch up in some capacity. So I'm going to check back. Hopefully I can check raise river or get a good value bet in on the river. When the river is the jack of diamonds, and my opponent checks to me a 3rd time, I'm thinking he has to be pretty weak here. I thought the jack was actually a really good card for me. If he for some reason had 2nd pair the whole way, he would make trips and lead and be pretty much dead. But I bet $125, hoping like an ace 4 offsuit or pocket kings will just give me a disbelieving call. And after a decent sized tank, my opponent does decide to call. So getting paid off on another set turned into full house definitely feels pretty good. And our stack has grown very nicely. Which brings us to a final hand of note. An early position player raises to $20. The button calls the 20, and I'm on the big blind with pocket 9s. The early position player only has about $300 in his stack, and the button only has about $200 in his stack. So if I'm going to play 9s, I'm trying to get all the money in pre and get to see all 5 cards, with likely the best hand facing a 50-50 at worst. So I'm going to 3-bet this one on the very large size. I make it $110. The early position pre-flop aggressor folds, but the button calls. leaving himself only about $70 behind. When the flop is ace, jack, 8, 2 clubs, I have to pause for a second and make it look like I actually have an ace X here, because getting a pair of jacks to fold here would be pretty nice, but realistically I'm jamming with my exact hand and my opponent's exact stack size, regardless of what the board texture is. So as I just grab chips in forward motion, my opponent actually beats me into the pot with his chips. Pretty bad sign. Asks me if I want to run it twice. I say sure, because I'm honestly just hoping I can hit 1-9 out of 4 cards to get half the pot back.
Now you have to ask yourself one question. Do I feel lucky?
Well, top board runs out ace 3 of hearts and bottom board runs out 8-7 offsuit, so I don't think I'm the winner on this one. And I announce 9s and my opponent folds.
I have 9.
Claiming he had king queen of clubs. I suppose that's the only hand I could beat on these boards. I truly don't know how I dodged that many outs 4 times, but we will take it. So after 4 hours of playing in Hollywood, we are into the game for $1,100, out of the game for $1,599 for a profit of $499. Across 4 hours equates to $125 an hour or 25 big blinds an hour. If you've watched all the way to this point, thank you, I appreciate it. If you hit the like button, it helps me out a ton. And as always, there will be more to come next week.